Today on the podcast, a book about a man that never dies. So if that's something you're interested in, hang around and listen to a novel review. Hello and welcome to the Literature Podcast, a novel review. My name is Seamus, your host, and together we will discuss, dissect, and explore the wonderful world of literature. And the wonderful world of literature is a vast and dense jungle. So let's start making our way through, one book at a time. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of a novel review, a book podcast. My name is Seamus, I am the host, and if this is your first time joining me, then yeah, it's a book podcast. We do a book every week. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. If this is not your first time tuning in, of course, thank you. Welcome back. Thanks for coming back. It's fantastic to have you here, and you would well know that before I jump into the book, I actually spend a few moments talking about my mantelpiece moment, which is just something to highlight from the week past. And this past week, I went to Belgium to a lovely town called Ghent. I also went to another town called Bruges, but I stayed in Ghent. And while I was there, I invariably did some book shopping. So I thought I'd quickly run you through those books because I love buying books when you're traveling, whether it's, a town that you're just visiting or another country or wherever. Just I love buying the books because then it means you've got sort of a little, home library of books that you've collected from everywhere you've traveled. So let's talk about the three books I bought. First one I bought basically because of the cover. I picked it up because of the cover and it sounded like a really cool book. The Reluctant Fundamentalist by Mohsid Hamin. It looks really interesting. It's basically about a man that sort of invites another man to join him for tea, and he just starts talking about his life. And it seems to be this really intricate but also dark kind of life. It looks really, really promising. It's under 200 pages or 209 pages. There we go. And it looks incredibly readable. What also sort of helped as well is on the cover it says beautifully written by Philip Pullman, and when I bought it I was reading a book by Philip Pullman, the first in his Dark Materials trilogy, so I thought that was kind of like a cool little connection that I picked it up for the cover. And then the book that I was currently reading, the author was on the cover of this book, so it seemed like a nice little segue to buy this. So I bought that and I hope to start that relatively soon. The second book I bought because, again, the cover looked incredible. It's kind of like a view of some towns in Italy, sort of the hills and the towns. Looks very Tuscan-esque. I don't think it is in Tuscany, though, to be fair. But that's kind of the vibe, sort of the general vibe. And it's by the author Cesar Pavese. It's called The Moon and the Bonfires. And he is, if you've never heard of him, he is an absolutely incredible Italian writer. And I've read some of his shorter works, and they're just so lyrical and beautiful. And they reach such an incredible depth. And this looks like a really good book. It seems to be quite, I don't say stereotypical just because I haven't read the book yet, but it seems like a guy that's sort of quite successful, comes back to his town, and then he invariably starts to sort of go through a few things. I don't know because I haven't read it, but it seems to be a few things, sort of the darkness of his past, maybe what pushed him away, brought him back, that kind of thing. So just unpacking the childhood, I guess, and that's always a fun thing to do. So that looks really interesting. And yeah, Cesar Pavese is just a fantastic writer, so really keen to start reading that one as well. And then the last book I bought was Stephen Erikson's Dead House Gates, which, if you've never heard of Stephen Erikson, he has written this very accomplished fantasy series called the Malazan Book of the Fallen series. And this is the second book in the series. I bought the first book a little time ago, though I've yet to start it. And I've always just been like, well, I can't start it yet because I don't have book 2. And I've never actually seen book 2 in a bookshop. And despite the fact that it seems to be revered as this really accomplished and successful fantasy series, it seems to be very sparsely populated upon the bookshelves, which I take as a good thing because they're obviously just always sold out. But yeah, I saw it there and was like, well, I have to buy it now. I can't wait to start it, but I know I also have to wait to start it because I believe there's 10 books in the series and they are all, I think, about 1,000 pages, and that's quite a solid amount of reading, especially when you do a book podcast and you're wanting to do a book a week. And it kind of highlights probably the best and worst thing about doing a podcast is you get all these exciting ideas and you want to try different things and do different books and do different series. And then it comes to it and you've actually got to read the books. And sometimes that takes a bit longer than a week because, yeah, 1,000-page book, I don't think I could smash that in a week. And it's not the kind of series that I really want to be smashing through. So I think I'm going to have to wait a little bit to start this series, which is a shame, but I don't know, maybe I'll read 1, 2, maybe 3 of the books next year. I don't know, but that's definitely on the horizon in the very near future. So felt very happy getting that, and the other 2 books as well. So very successful little book trip. Would have loved to have bought more, could have easily bought more, but that's just kind of the nature of the beast, isn't it? But in case you're wondering as well, Ghent, beautiful, beautiful town, really picturesque, really nice people. Incredibly beautiful town. Went to Bruges as well. Bruges was beautiful, but there's a lot more tourists in Bruges. Ghent was incredible. The beer was incredible. The chocolate was incredible. The waffles were incredible. The weather was nice. Everyone's friendly. Stunning, beautiful place. So yeah, would definitely recommend. And weirdly, there was quite a lot of bookshops that were really incredibly curated and really beautiful to visit. So that was my mantelpiece moment this week. Housekeeping, as always, if you would like to like and subscribe, that would be incredible. If you're on YouTube, click the duck in the corner. Something really fun happens when you do. You subscribe to my channel. So yeah, 5-star reviews, they cost you nothing, but they are a huge treat for me, and they help other people find the show as well, which is also very fun. So I'd really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Okay, time to get into the main body of work, the main body of this podcast, Call Me Stan, A Tragedy in 3 Millennia by K.R. Wilson. It is a wonderful book, a book that the author actually sent me. It's kind of funny because it's called Call Me Stan, and that's what the main character is, I guess, technically called, but I actually know him by the name Ishanu, which is the first name he has, and that kind of brings me to the overview. It is about a man who cannot die, and for whatever reason, we don't quite know at the beginning. He is in custody. It's not really explicitly said, but it's kind of alluded to that he is in custody, and he's now going back to tell the story of his life. And obviously he starts at the very beginning when his name is Ishanu, and that was 3,000 years ago. And it's just this wonderful story where you just go through his life. And as he can't die, he naturally sweeps through all of history, or all of, I guess, well, not all of recorded human history if it's only 3,000 years, but pretty close to it. A vast majority of it, I should say. And so it's this wonderful story where he just gets to sweep through history. It's a wonderful adventure story. It's just a sweeping narrative, isn't it? It's a lot of fun. And it kind of got me thinking, would I want to live forever? Would you want to live forever? It's, I think, a very big question because it's forever. And I don't think we can't conceive what that actually looks like and what that would actually look like. But I think most people would say they want to live perhaps a little bit longer, but I guess then it becomes all relative in a sense. But, 80, 90, 100 years doesn't seem long enough. But maybe 200 years would be fun. This is sort of this is answering my own question. I think maybe 200 years would be fun, maybe 300 years. I don't know. See like a real change in history would be interesting, I guess. But I mean, history is changing all the time. So one change can't be that different from the last change. So seeing an additional 200 years might not be as interesting as I'm making it out to be. I don't think I'd want to live forever, although who knows, by the time I get to 80, maybe we'll be putting our brains into jars and plugging into the matrix. So that could be, well, I don't want to do that either. That would be, I think, not that nice. So no, I don't think I'd like to live forever, but Ishanu seems to have this really nice sort of, I guess he has a really nice way of addressing it, not even addressing it, just sort of living with it, in that he doesn't really address it. He just kind of starts going off and doing things, and he doesn't really understand why he can't die. And he doesn't really question it either. He just kind of gets on living. From memory, he's sort of locked in what I imagine to be about the age of 25, which I think both emotionally and physically is probably pretty good. 25, because I think that's sort of an age where you really start to understand the world in perhaps a deeper level. And of course, if you're stuck at 25 and spend 1,000 years at the age of 25, you've obviously got a lot more wisdom than an 80-year-old would have today. So that's also very interesting. But I think physically, 25, I think most people would agree, is probably a pretty good age to be stuck at. Because, yeah, it's probably really your physical prime. I know there's probably science behind it that disagrees with that, but I think 25 would be a pretty good age. So he's stuck at 25. He's just living forever, and he's not questioning it. He's just going about living his life. And that was sort of one of the things I loved about the story, is it's just this really sweeping narrative, and he sort of moves through history. And what I really loved about it was, because for him, it's not, for Ishtanu, it's not history, it's the present day. So there's kind of like the immediate concern of, okay, well, now we have to get the character. This is, I'm assuming what the writer, K.R. Wilson, went through is, I've got this character that can't die. Now I need to get him to pockets of history that are really significant, really culturally significant, and make him seem really natural and organic, but also have the character Ishtanu participating in it, so he's not just witnessing them from the backgrounds of a crowd or something like that. And it was incredibly fun because you do sweep through history, and there's wonderful moments where you see creation of myth and gods, and I'll talk about one briefly now so I don't spoil too much of the story. But this was, I think, the first time I really picked up on what Mr. Wilson was doing with his story, and I really enjoyed it. At one stage in the story, and it's quite early, he is with some other characters, and one of them is called Traw, and Traw is sort of growing up, and he grows up to become the leader of this little company, and they're going around sort of conquering a few things, and Traw is a bit of a dick, to be quite honest. He's a bit of a power-hungry man, and one day Ishtanu decides we can have no more of Traw. So he kills him, but of course you can't just admit to killing the leader of sort of this little community, because that would mean you're going to get killed too, which obviously wouldn't be too bad in this story because Ishtanu can't die, but that then might lead to him being chained up somewhere in the desert and left. So he kills him, and then naturally, because you can't admit to killing him, he comes back with this story of Traw and his hammer were not killed by me, they were killed by this great sea monster that came out, and Traw fought this great battle, and you know, it was really epic and wonderful, and Traw sadly fell in the fight defending sort of his people from this great sea monster and was taken to the sea. And that's kind of the end of that narrative. And then he moves on. He moves on from this particular tribe. He heads, I believe it was north at this stage, more north, because he can't hang around people for too long, because after about 20 years, they're kind of like, you've looked about 25 for a very long time now. What is going on? So they start to get suspicious. So he moves on from this particular tribe. Ishtanu moves on from this tribe, and he comes back, I think it was like 200-300 years later. He's passing back through this general area, and Traw's story is still alive and well. And of course, it's now transitioned into Thor and Thor's hammer. And Traw, seen as this, became this big sort of godly character that's fought the great sea monster, and now he's someone to look up to, and he's quite revered and respected. And it was just this wonderful moment of being like, oh, that's potentially how the Norse mythology started, as these sort of stories that we told to inspire hope among the people, when really we were just trying to kill someone off to the side who was a bit of a dick. So that was, in this particular story, how Thor and Thor's hammer came about. And I think that's really comedically wonderful and enjoyable, and also probably quite historically not accurate, but also just sort of like historically how it possibly came about. These stories just evolve and kind of snowball and avalanche and gain traction the more they go and the more they build up and the more culturally significant and embedded they become. So I really enjoyed that aspect. And I think what it was doing from that is really just sort of highlighting the unknown pockets of history we have, because there is so much history that we just don't know. And I think it was wonderfully researched, this book, because he's just taken so many dark pockets of history. And I don't mean dark in a kind of violent way, but I mean dark in a kind of, we just have no information about them, or very little information about them. And he's just kind of inserted this character. And it's a really great thing from a storytelling perspective, because it made the story feel incredibly realistic. And I know I say that talking about a story of a man who doesn't die, but it felt really natural and realistic in this character Ishtanu moving through history, because one of the chief concerns, as I said, was trying to get Ishtanu at these culturally significant aspects without it feeling forced, without it feeling rushed. And I don't think it feels forced or rushed at all, because there's just so much history to choose from. So it would be, I'm not going to say quite easy, because I'm not saying I could do it, but finding these little pockets to jump and push him into. And I think another one, I mean, at one stage, you know, well, actually one thing I will say is, like, he's actively taking part in history. And he doesn't realize it's historically significant at the time, but he's actively taking part. One part is we meet Jesus Christ. And he's not watching Jesus's crucifixion from the crowd. He's like, I'm not going to say too much, but he's actively taking part in it in some way. And it was kind of like that really natural, organic way of like seizing these characters that we don't know enough about, these characters through history in inverted commas, seizing them and utilizing them in a great story. And it's sort of a great storytelling aspect. There's another one I'll mention now. Fast forward 1,500 years, just a mere 1,500 years. And you find yourself in England. I believe it was about 1200 AD. Maybe it was 1300. I can't quite remember now. And I really like this aspect because it takes place, a town is mentioned up in Essex where my girlfriend's family is from and still live. So I was like, oh, I know that place really well. And then there's pressure mounting on these particular farm folk, and they come to London to enact kind of a mini revolution because they're pissed off that taxes are sort of being forced upon them. And so there's this little revolution that takes place, and it's historically an actual revolution that actually took place. And one of the characters, the character that Ishanu takes on, the name that he takes on for this, actually is a historically real character that we actually have no information about beyond their name. And so it's kind of taking these characters that we know nothing about through history and giving them this story and tying them all to Ishanu, which I think really made it historically accurate, but also wonderfully fun, because these characters we know nothing about. I mean, maybe it is the same person popping up through history that can't die, and maybe Kevin Wilson, the writer, knows something that I don't. But I thought it was just incredibly fun for that. Another aspect of this book that really kind of carries it is there's kind of two things: the humor and the mystery. The humor just sort of like intersects this story at so many wonderful points, because we know he's sort of been arrested and he's, I'm assuming, in custody. And he's telling this story then, this great sweeping story of 3,000 years through the modern perspective and using the modern language. Because throughout this story, Ishanu has to learn so many different languages to exist in the society that he's existing in. And language obviously evolves as society evolves. So he knows so many different languages and therefore knows so many different things. And so he's telling it with this modern perspective, and he always intersects it with these modern sort of thoughts that I thought really brought a wonderful freshness to it. Like at one stage, he's kind of like, I wanted to go out and distract myself, but like Starbucks didn't exist then. And like, even though I've personally never been to a Starbucks, it's kind of like that little intersection of, oh yeah, Starbucks didn't exist. What did you do? Which I thought just brought this wonderful, really relevant freshness to the story. But then there was kind of like the duality of, there was the wonderful research aspect of this book, in that even though he brought this wonderful freshness to the story and modernization of the story, he still kept sort of place names and people names authentic and true to the time period, which I thought was wonderful and wonderfully executed and researched. So like when we meet Jesus Christ, for example, he's not called Jesus because that wasn't what he was called in the Middle East back then. He was called, Yeshu. And so, you know, it's this wonderful balance of research and fun and modernization all going on at the same point, and just calling these characters by their traditional, authentic, real names, I thought really helped to remind you and serve to remind you as you're reading this story that no, we're in a particular time period and this is what it was actually called. And so there's the wonderful level of research going on through the story where it's, as I said, historically quite accurate for those reasons. But then there's just the wonderful intersection of modern sensibilities and thoughts and concerns and all this stuff. And it made it really fun and really readable to read and enjoyable. And because you're going through so much history, you can sort of stop. Like if you were reading the sort of the riot that was going on in London, the sort of mini revolution, you could stop and then research that further, because you know it is quite historically accurate. At least it felt quite historically accurate. And so you went through all these wonderful pockets of history where if you were interested more, you could read about it more. And I really enjoyed that. But then there's the mystery of the book as well. There's a few different mysteries going on in this book. The first mystery, which kind of I felt took the back seat for a lot of the story, mostly because I forgot about it, is why is he in custody and why is he telling this story? It kind of lasts, the opening chapter sort of lasts like 2 or 3 pages, and he's kind of like, I'm in custody, blah, blah, blah. He doesn't say it like that. But he then goes, well, I'll tell you the story from the beginning. And then he starts telling the story, and then I completely forgot that he was in custody. And I was just like so wrapped up in this sweeping narrative. And so there's this mystery of like, why is he in custody and telling this story? Then there's the mystery of, but why does he actually live forever? I don't know if we're going to get answers to this. Why does he actually live forever? And then, wonderfully, and I thought this was wonderful, was another person pops up who can live forever that he's recognized sort of from 1,000 years earlier. And then they sort of start a relationship, and she's also confused as to why they live forever. So it sort of creates this idea that, okay, there's at least one other person that can live forever. They have sex a couple times, many times, because they've got nothing but time on their hands, and they don't seem to be able to fall pregnant. So then it's interesting because you're like, okay, so they can't reproduce, but they can live forever. So it's kind of like really frightening for that aspect, because naturally you've pretty much only got each other now, and everyone else is going to die around you at some stage because you're going to live forever. But then really late in the story, you meet a third person who also can live forever, and she makes reference to there being more people. So now we've got this mystery of how many people can actually live forever. This particular woman had given birth to someone as well. So now we've got that mystery. Again, I have no idea if these are actually significant to the story. They were just sort of thoughts running through my head. And it's just sort of creating all these wonderful mystery that's going on. And I mean, I won't spoil the ending, but I will say there is going to be a book 2. And I'm very excited to see where that goes, because through the progress of the book, it is quite a big book. I think it's 420 pages or something, 417. It is quite a big book, and it brings us right up to the present day. So I know he is writing a second book about it. I don't know how many books there are going to be, if it's going to be a series or it's going to end with book 2. Naturally, he's in custody, and we know that, and it sort of addresses why he's in custody right at the end. But we're at the present day now, so there's no more story unless we're going to start imagining what the future's going to like, or we're going to delve into greater depth into some of the pockets of history. I don't know, but I am excited. That was Call Me Stan, A Tragedy in 3 Millennia by K.R. Wilson. I also think it's kind of funny calling it a tragedy in 3 millennia, because I don't think Stan really views it as a tragedy, the fact that he can live forever. He seems to not enjoy it, because he does definitely struggle in certain areas, but there is another character who really struggles with it. And he seems to have an all right time with it. So A Tragedy in 3 Millennia, I think that's just kind of, I took it as quite a comedic title, because he just seems to have fun, and it's a wonderfully comedic, fun, enjoyable, readable, sweeping story about a man that can't die. I would rate this a 4.2 out of 5, and I absolutely cannot wait. Have no idea where it's up to, no idea how much he's actually written, but I cannot wait for the next book. So Call Me Stan. So what am I reading this week? This week I'm actually listening to a book. It's Another Country by James Baldwin. It's an incredible book so far. I think about halfway through. Beautiful. I mean, James Baldwin is easily one of my favorite authors. He is just so beautiful and lyrical with his writing style, but he just goes to such pointillated, don't even know if that's a word, but such pointillated depths in particular aspects of society and life and human life, human experience, but also cultural life, cultural experience, collective life and experience, societal. He just touches on so many different things in such a beautiful and simple and easy way that it makes it an absolute pleasure to read or listen to. If you haven't read any James Baldwin, I'd thoroughly recommend it. Giovanni's Room is probably a great one to start. That's quite short. It's about 150 pages. He is just a beautiful writer, and I can't wait to talk about that on an episode, so hang around for that. If you have listened this far, please consider hitting those 5 stars. I would really appreciate it. If you're on YouTube, click the duck in the bottom left corner. Something amazing happens when you do, so check that out. And yeah, just thank you so much for listening this far. I really appreciate it. So today, to take us away, I think a very simple quote from The Moon and the Bonfires by Caesar Bass. It's the dedication. And this is definitely not because I forgot to get a little outgoing quote for today. And it's simple, it's 3 words, and it's simple, effective, and beautiful. And it is, ripeness is all.